Here we are. In our last video, I discussed the threats to a complete and fulfilling form of bioethics and the threats consequently to a fulfilling notion of well-being. Here I will go a little more in detail in discussing these threats, or at least the philosophical roots that led to these assumptions, to these commonplaces with which we started approaching each other and our environment within our society. So, I mentioned at the beginning the problem of dualism. Here, if we take a phenomenological approach, phenomenology is a contemporary philosophical school founded by Husserl, um, who wrote The Crisis of European Sciences. He, in the European sciences, he tried to find the principle of corruption that at some point infected sciences and our way to use sciences for human beings. At some point in his crisis, he says that science of facts would generate human of facts. Now it's my very poor translation, I'm sorry, but I will explain you what I mean by that. If science is based only on um, measurable, practical characteristics, and it's applied in the same practical, measurable, quantitative ways, science would reproduce in its way of application other measures. The human being would become a measure. Here, in the crisis of European sciences, but in general in the history of science, we see how in his Saggiatore and in his treatises, Galilei is trying to produce an idea of science that is independent from the Bible, which up to a certain point was dominating the view of science, and is trying to produce a view of nature that can be objective, that can be separated from the human beings. Hence, or better, from the spiritual aspect of the human beings, from the religious aspect of the human beings. Hence, numbers are invention, meaning discoveries of what is in nature. When we talk about number, we talk about a token that somehow summarizes, synthesizes the complexity of life. We are taking a measure that is a placeholder for a certain complexity. Through time, we forgot that this is a placeholder and we attributed to it the full thing. We became facts, we became numbers, we were reduced to this form and separated from all the complexity that is behind that form or that stands for that form. So, in his Crisis of European Sciences, Husserl reconsiders Descartes, whose philosophy he takes in great regard. But he criticizes a certain clear cut way of intending Descartes' dualism. He says we cannot separate the temporal experience of having a body, res cogitans, from the temporal experience of being a body. Why am I using here the adjective temporal? Because the real dualism that Descartes mentions, as we see in his principle second, number 23, is not about a belief that says, okay, here there's a body, there's the mind. It wouldn't be so naive. I mean, substance dualism is a very strong form of dualism, which unfortunately certain science, certain medical application tends still to apply. Here, Descartes is saying that the res cogitans and res extensa, the being a mind and being a body, uh, are built on two different temporal attributes. So one indicates a successive duration, the other one an innate idea of time. Res cogitans thinks. Our mind thinks of itself according a before and after. Our body seems to live according to an itself form of time that is very difficult for us to crack. So the latter, the body, the res extensa, indicate a temporal quality in which this being extends without almost without time, while the res cogitans recognizes and organizes knowledge according to a before and after. Now, what is the problem of substance dualism? In substance dualism, we use the body as something completely separated from the mind and instrumental to other perceptions. So, if I consider a temporal dualism, I would be able to work with the body in order to understand how I build knowledge. So, the unknown, the mystery of the constitution of meanings would be part of my way of measuring life. The absolute of the truth that the body brings in itself, the absolute of life as it is expressed in the body, participates with being the body. So participates with the uniqueness we express while we are this body. If we separate the two, we believe that Körper, meaning the biological body, is something objective thrown there into nature, and we can go there, measure there, and science is this big judge, this big healer that would measure this body, would measure its well being without us participating in that. We are patients. We are those who have to use patience while others operate. We are those who have to patio, to patire, I mean, to feel pain and to bear with this pain when something higher, something above us is taking place. So this form of substance dualism that do not consider the cooperation between the two and the different quality of our way of living time. So a time that belongs to nature and the time as we organize it according to our brain, according to the continuum semanticum with which the brain organizes data. If we don't consider this dualism, but we consider a more simplistic dualism that reinforces our being objects, well, if that happens, that science never concerns us. We are objects, and as objects, we cannot be subjects. By definition, if we are objects, we don't have any saying in how we are feeling. We cannot communicate the sense of our knowledge, the way in which we organize our feeling the world, our being in the world. We cannot express what life, meaning being a body, is, because we are object of measurement, we are object of science, we are object of studies, and as objects we are foreign to our life because we are not subject anymore. So this reinforces clearly a certain mechanistic way of looking at the human body. You, I don't know, see that you have recurrent stomach aches, and you just wonder, you look at this thing that is all around you and you wonder, oh wow, why do I have these recurrent stomach aches? Okay, it doesn't belong to me. I go to the scientist. I mean, I'm not using air quotes for scientists. I'm using air quotes for the scientist that is a kind of a mechanic, or a kind of a professional of something that is foreign to us, and okay, it adjusts things and it fixes these things as they should be, without us thinking twice of how stressful your life is in that moment, how painful it is for you to go through a certain number of events in your life. So science, certainly, as we were saying before with Potter, is essential to a sustainable well-being of human beings. A science that reinforces dualism, that considers us as a machine. And so you have recurrent stomach aches, just take these pills. Don't think about it. It's going to be okay. It's a form of scientific reductionistic way of looking at knowledge, which reinforces a reductionistic, dualistic, scientific way of treating human beings. Where again, life, feelings, emotions, the inner way in which we organize this knowledge, the way in which we take part of life does not play any role into our well-being. I find this, along with Husserl, Foucault, and Merleau-Ponty, and other phenomenological tradition, somewhat limiting. Contra reductionism. So, as I was mentioning before, reductionism is a word that comes from Latin reducere. According to reductionism, we bring back the complexity of life to something, in this case, in this sense of reductionism, very simple. A way of looking at the complexity of life is through mereology, meaning through this discipline that considers the relationship between parts and wholes and parts and wholes and wholes. The example of the three I was giving you in the chapter before. We can consider ourselves as individual beings and see ourselves as completely separated from each other. We would reduce the complexity of our life to ourselves. Very soon, our life would be incredibly flat, miserable, boring. It's important to have a, I would say, mereological, holistic, complex view on life, because this take on life would allow us to look at the interconnections that keep us together. We can see, as I was saying to you before, we can see the tree as roots, trunk, branches, leaves, or we can see the tree as the full tree and see how beautifully all its parts collaborate with each other in creating the tree. And we can see also this tree in collaboration with other trees inside the forest and see how the flowers and the grass around the trees constitutes the well-being of the trees. Clearly, a view of the tree in that way, and mereological, if you want. Um, Mereology is more complex, of course. Now I'm using this term as a placeholder for something in itself even more complex. But if we look at the tree as part of this forest, clearly we would have a much more surprising, a much more large view of life. So here Novikov is saying equally essential for the purposes of scientific analysis are both the isolation of parts of the whole and their integration into the structure of the whole. Here, Potter and the other great fathers, founders of bioethics, Callan, Reich, Engelhardt, talk about the sickness of reductionism and the need for bioethics to stand up against reductionism. Bioethics is born with the goal of reintegrating our scientific view of parts within the whole. We have science on the one hand, which dissects according to from the simple to the most complex steps the elements of a certain investigation. Philosophy wants to give the full picture of a certain problem, and the human being who participates in this picture and changes this picture while looking at it. So the consideration of one to the exclusion of the other acts to retard the development of biological and sociological sciences to achieve a truly holistic or ecosystematic approach. Not only ecology, but other disciplines in the natural, social, and political sciences as well must emerge to new, either to unrecognized of thinking and action. So, if we accept reductionism, a overly simplistic view of reducing human beings to numbers or reducing parts to separated entities from the whole, we would slow down the development of biological and sociological sciences. We would slow down the development of our ecological well-being. We would slow down the possible intuitions we might have to achieve sustainable well-being. Um, Being able to see how we are, yes, individuals, and if our stomach hurts, it hurts, and we need to take a pill. But if we are able to see how our stomach connects to a complexity of life, of my body who is living in a certain place, with certain people, in a certain time, if I'm capable of looking at the full picture and at the parts of these pictures as well, then I might have a better chances to live a longer life. The same we can say with the ecosystem. If I treat my home as an unicum in the universe and I'm not taking care of the use of electricity, the how I consume plastic, or how I recycle the garbage, Okay, I mean, I might have a nice house for a bit, but this will not be sustainable. This is an uncaring way of managing my well being, because quite soon I'm going to eat food filled with plastic, like many others of us. Because if we don't do if we don't recycle our garbage in a thoughtful way, it can get lost in the water. In the water, fishes will eat it, and will eat it inside with that. I mean, it's a cycle. Not being able to see the full cycle, not being able to see the full picture, leaves us with very little meanings and very little choice. Contra scientism. Here, by scientism, I mean this unquestioned belief according to which science is the final word, and not science as an endeavor to discover something that is always under scrutiny, but a very superficial definition of science, for which science is the answer. Science is a perfect discipline that does not need to question itself. This kind of science I find very dangerous. So, by scientism, I mean the unquestioned belief according to which a science and its cosmetic application is the only reliable answer to complex problems and the unique source of knowledge. This kind of science, I think, the science that doesn't question itself, the science that does not consider its job never ending, but it's consider its job perfect, meaning per facere, something that exhausts itself, like the toothpaste tube. Okay, it's over, it's perfect. Eh, this kind of science might be dangerous, because science is a never-ending self-questioning job, in which humanity grows along with it and through it. Scientism is a form of naive belief in cosmetic applications of science. So, science can give the answer to a final answer to, um, I don't know, a sense of depression. Yeah, okay, if you take antidepressants, you might experience a new way for your body to handle serotonin. Uh, but that is not the final answer. I mean, your way to heal from depression is something very personal, it's something very unique. It's a never ending job of self description and self observation. So, the scientific use of science, that it's not self questioning, it's not self reflecting, as Heisenberg noticed, can very easily lead to the instrumentalization of science, for which science becomes a sort of a weapon that technology uses to persuade to do things that are absolutely unethical. The atomic bomb is the most evident example. Tuskegee, the scientists working at the Tuskegee experiment were quite convinced that nevertheless they were doing the right thing, because they were encouraging the development of science. And so people, again, people who are objects and not subjects of science, had to bend in front of this God that is science, and they have to give up their lives in front of this objective, unquestioned, self-centered God. And clearly, this kind of science is very detrimental to our sustainable well being, because it's a science that doesn't ask questions. It's a science that does not reflect on what's the right thing to do, what is the right direction to take, and what are the ethical boundaries of a certain application. from a science like that, not only us as human beings, but our environment, our earth, we're certainly suffering from. All right. This is all I wanted to discuss with you in this chapter. In the next chapter, I will discuss the notions of our way of handling emotions and the way in which emotions are seen through the history of philosophy and today. And I will try to present arguments to show why I think bioethics would gain something unique and important in reconnecting with human emotions. All right, thank you so much for listening, watching my presentation. See you soon to discuss the next chapters. Bye.